Hi there, it's Matt here. Welcome back to the podcast, and welcome back to what may be one of the most striking sleep disorders that we've ever come across. Indeed, it may be one of the most challenging medical conditions that we know of, except it is not. That is the tragic condition that is not a nightmare. It is what we call REM Sleep Behavior Disorder. It affects about 1 in every 100 people, perhaps more, especially in older adults. And here is the truly unsettling part. If you take a large group of people with idiopathic REM sleep behavior disorder, more than half of them will go on to develop Parkinson's disease, dementia with Lewy bodies, or multiple system atrophy within about a decade. Today, we are talking about a disorder that reveals the stunning architecture of human sleep and what happens when one crucial component of that architecture starts to crumble. Think of normal REM sleep like a magic act. Your brain is doing one thing, running a movie, generating vivid dreams with emotional intensity, while your body is doing something else entirely. Your muscles are locked, completely immobilized. That state is called muscle atonia, and it is perhaps the most underappreciated of all the safety mechanisms your body possesses. Why does this exist? Because if your muscles were not paralyzed during REM sleep, you would act out every dream. You would be punching your spouse. You would be running through your bedroom. You would be reliving traumas and acting them out in the dark. Over evolutionary time, your brain solved this problem with an elegant neurobiological solution. Deep in your brainstem, in a tiny region called the sublaterodorsal nucleus, if you want to sound like a neuroscientist at a dinner party, there is a cluster of neurons that are predominantly glutamatergic. Think of glutamate as the brain's accelerator pedal. These neurons fire intensively during REM sleep. When they fire, they send a command signal down toward the spinal cord that says, paralyze the muscles. But here is where it gets interesting. These neurons in the sublaterodorsal nucleus do not directly paralyze your muscles. Instead, they activate a set of inhibitory neurons in the ventromedial medulla and in the spinal cord. Those inhibitory neurons release neurotransmitters like GABA and glycine. These are the brain's brake pedals. They clamp down on your motor neurons in the spinal cord. And when those motor neurons are inhibited, your muscles go limp. It is like a double negative creating a positive effect. Activation leads to inhibition, which leads to paralysis. That is the poetry of neuroscience. In animal studies, when researchers have lesioned the sublaterodorsal nucleus, essentially destroying it, something remarkable happens. Those animals still enter REM sleep. They still show the EEG signature of REM. But their muscles do not paralyze. They start acting out their dreams. They exhibit complex movements that look disturbingly similar to what we see in REM sleep behavior disorder patients. There are even documented cases where humans suffered strokes or inflammatory lesions in the region of the sublaterodorsal nucleus or nearby dorsomedial pontine areas, and they developed REM sleep behavior disorder almost immediately. The clinical evidence lines up with the laboratory evidence. The circuit is elegant, the circuit is essential, and the circuit is, in some people, broken. REM sleep behavior disorder is, at its core, a breakdown in this system. It is still debated whether the main problem originates in the sublaterodorsal nucleus itself, or whether the problem is downstream in those spinal and medullary inhibitory circuits. The balance of evidence suggests that degeneration in these lower brainstem regions is especially important. But in either case, the result is the same. Muscle atonia fails. When muscle atonia fails, what happens next seems almost inevitable. The person's motor cortex is still firing. The dreams are still happening. But now, without the paralysis, the dreams become reality. The person punches, they kick, they sometimes scream or shout, they live out their nightmares in real time. In sleep laboratories, we can see people flailing, leaping, or violently thrashing while their EEG clearly shows they are in REM sleep. A long-standing partner of today's podcast is Element, spelled LMNT. Element is a sugar-free electrolyte drink mix, and for me, it was the sugar-free part that made me start using it a while back. And again, I buy my own supply just to stay objective. Beyond having the electrolytes in the right balance, the other reason I'm a fan of Element is that it's scientific. If you look up the people who created the company, you'll find some pretty heavy-hitting physiology, biochemistry, and pharmacology knowledge baked into the product. And again, all of that comes without any sugar. Now, here's the update. Element's lemonade salt flavor, which used to be seasonal, was so popular that it's now permanent. You can get it year-round. Happily, I badgered them, and they have agreed to give you fine folks a free 8-count sample pack with any purchase of Element if you use the link drinklmnt.com/Matt Walker. So for free product with your purchase, just visit drinklmnt.com/Matt Walker. And as I said, you'll get some free product. This is where we have to talk about injury, because REM sleep behavior disorder is not a curiosity. It is dangerous. Depending on the study and how you measure it, between about a third and more than 90% of people with REM sleep behavior disorder report having injured either themselves or their bed partner. Some of those injuries are bruises and scratches. Some are much worse. In one large cohort, a little over 1 in 10 patients suffered injuries severe enough to require medical intervention or hospitalization. There were even cases of bleeding inside the skull from falls out of bed or collisions with furniture during dream enactment. And here is an important twist. Idiopathic REM sleep behavior disorder, the kind where there is no diagnosed neurological disease at the time, is actually associated with more severe injuries than REM sleep behavior disorder in people who already have Parkinson's disease. One likely explanation is that individuals with early, undiagnosed REM sleep behavior disorder have an otherwise intact motor system, full strength and speed, but no brakes. Those with established Parkinson's disease may already be weaker and slower. This changes how we need to think about this disorder. It is not something to simply watch and wait on. It is not a benign sleep quirk. It is a condition with real risk of physical harm, both to the person themselves and to the person sleeping beside them. Now let us talk about the diagnostic odyssey, because this is where the Michael Lewis part of the story begins. This is a story about information asymmetry, about how some parts of the medical system know and most parts do not, and how that gap can hide a ticking time bomb. Diagnosing REM sleep behavior disorder properly requires a full overnight sleep study, polysomnography with video recording. We need to capture REM sleep, measure muscle activity from the chin and limbs, and look for something called REM sleep without atonia. We also need to see or document the complex motor behaviors emerging from REM sleep. In formal criteria, you need repeated episodes of vocalization or complex motor behavior during REM, evidence of REM sleep without atonia on polysomnography, or a clear history plus a known neurodegenerative disease, clinically significant distress or injury risk, and exclusion of other causes, such as medication effects or other sleep disorders. But here is the problem. Many people with REM sleep behavior disorder have no idea they have it. In some series, a large proportion of patients are unaware of their own behaviors. They depend entirely on their bed partner to report them. People who sleep alone may have no one to witness the episodes. Others are on medications that partially dampen the behaviors, obscuring the diagnosis. Some simply do not remember what happened in the darkness. We also see something called isolated REM sleep without atonia. Individuals whose sleep studies show the signature pattern of elevated REM muscle tone and excessive phasic twitches, but they do not report acting out dreams. We do not yet know whether this represents an early forerunner of full-blown REM sleep behavior disorder, a kind of prodromal stage, or a benign variant. Longitudinal studies are underway to answer that question. Michael Lewis, when he writes about financial markets or baseball, loves to focus on hidden information and delayed recognition. Some people see the pattern early. Most people only see the wreckage later. REM sleep behavior disorder is like that. Most people with it do not know they have it. Many clinicians are not actively screening for it. And by the time the diagnosis is made, the underlying neurodegenerative process may have been simmering for years. One study looked at how long it takes for people with REM sleep behavior disorder to receive the correct diagnosis. On average, the delay was almost 9 years from symptom onset to diagnosis. Almost a decade of violent dream enactment before the label is applied. Even more striking, women waited on average well over 20 years for diagnosis, compared with under 10 years for men. In other words, women's symptoms were, on average, ignored or misattributed for more than 2 decades. Now we arrive at the part that changes how you think about this disorder forever: the neurodegenerative connection. In a large multi-center study, nearly 1,000 people with idiopathic REM sleep behavior disorder with no diagnosed neurological disease at baseline were followed over time. The annual conversion rate to conditions such as Parkinson's disease, dementia with Lewy bodies, or multiple system atrophy was a little over 6% per year. In one cohort, the cumulative risk was roughly 12% at 3 years, 20% at 5 years, a third at 7 years, and just over 50% at 10 years. By 10 years, it is essentially a coin flip. Other cohorts, especially Western ones, have reported even higher long-term conversion rates, with more than 70 to 80% of patients eventually developing a synucleinopathy. The exact percentage varies between populations, but the core message is unambiguous. Idiopathic REM sleep behavior disorder is one of the strongest known clinical predictors of future neurodegenerative disease. To put this in perspective, in Parkinson's disease, somewhere between about a quarter and over half of patients have REM sleep behavior disorder at some point, depending on how rigorously it is measured. In dementia with Lewy bodies and multiple system atrophy, the association is even stronger. In some series, the vast majority of patients have REM sleep behavior disorder. But if you start from the REM sleep behavior disorder side, the risk of moving into those diagnoses over the coming decade is far higher than the average person's risk. What is happening inside the brain during this time? In these diseases, the protein alpha-synuclein becomes misfolded and aggregates into pathological forms. Those aggregates damage neurons and spread through interconnected networks. Pathology often begins in lower brainstem and peripheral structures, such as the dorsal motor nucleus of the vagus and olfactory pathways, then ascends into midbrain and cortical regions. The brainstem nuclei that regulate REM sleep muscle atonia, including the sublaterodorsal nucleus and its downstream targets, are hit early in this process. This is why REM sleep behavior disorder is often described as a prodromal synucleinopathy. It is the opening scene of a neurodegenerative story that will, in a large fraction of cases, eventually include Parkinsonism, cognitive decline, autonomic failure, or all three. So what can we do about it? For decades, clinical practice relied chiefly on two medications for symptomatic relief of REM sleep behavior disorder: clonazepam, a long-acting benzodiazepine, and melatonin, the hormone that helps regulate circadian timing. In observational series and clinical experience, clonazepam looked quite effective. A majority of patients were reported to have near complete suppression of dream enactment behaviors, with another group showing partial improvements. Melatonin, often used at doses of several milligrams of immediate release formulation, also appeared helpful in many case series and tended to cause fewer adverse effects. Then more rigorous tests were run. In a randomized, placebo-controlled study in patients with Parkinson's disease and probable REM sleep behavior disorder, clonazepam at a low nightly dose showed no significant advantage over placebo on the primary clinical rating scale after several weeks of treatment. Another randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial tested slow-release melatonin at 4 milligrams nightly for 8 weeks in Parkinson's patients with REM sleep behavior disorder, and again found no significant difference between melatonin and placebo on the main outcome measure. These studies have limitations. The clonazepam dose was modest and not titrated up, and REM sleep behavior disorder diagnosis was not confirmed with polysomnography in every participant. The melatonin trial used a slow-release formulation and a relatively low dose compared to earlier case reports that used immediate release preparations. Still, they force us to acknowledge an uncomfortable reality. The medications we thought were unequivocally effective for REM sleep behavior disorder do not show robust benefits in the highest quality trials we have so far. There is another intriguing observation. Even when clonazepam appears clinically helpful, it often does not normalize REM sleep without atonia on the sleep study. In other words, it may reduce the behavioral expression of REM sleep behavior disorder, the injuries and violent movements, without actually restoring the underlying muscle paralysis circuitry. That suggests a more top-down modulation, raising arousal thresholds, dampening reactivity, rather than repairing the brainstem mechanisms.
So for, it must be at least a decade now, I have been an avid, probably more like rabid consumer of protein shakes. But the hard thing, honestly, in the supplement space, if you really understand and do your diligence, is this critical thing called trust. It is very hard to find a brand that you can truly trust. That's when I came across the company Puri and the really impressive founder. Even though I'm sure it makes them less profit versus other quick and loose companies, Puri takes quality more seriously than any company I've ever seen before. They have so many offerings, protein powders galore, but lots of other additions, but that's what I was focusing on here. Why did I choose them? Well, it's really for 4 specific reasons. Number 1, they are free from hormones. Number 2, they are free from GMOs. Number 3, they are free of any pesticides. And number 4, and this is the critical confidence part, every single batch is third-party tested for over 200 harmful contaminants, things like heavy metals, etc. All you have to do if you are a neurotic nerd like me, you can even scan the QRI code on the back of the product to get the third-party independent laboratory test results. That's how much trust and confidence they place in their product. By the way, if you want a recommendation, go for the dark chocolate flavored protein powder. It's just exceptional. In fact, it's wonderfully addictive. I didn't just say that. Anyway, it delivers 21 grams of protein per serving. And for folks of my podcast right now, you can save 20%. So go over to peori.com/Matt Walker, and that is spelled PUORI.com, Matt Walker. So again, that is PUORI.com/Matt Walker, and you will get 20% off your product.
Dopamine agonists such as pramipexole have also been studied mostly in open-label or observational designs. In one series, a large majority of patients reported moderate reduction or complete resolution of REM sleep behavior disorder symptoms, with benefits persisting for up to 2 years on average at typical evening doses under 1 milligram. These findings are encouraging, especially in patients with coexisting periodic limb movements, but we still lack large randomized controlled trials to fully establish efficacy and safety. So where does that leave us? With a candid conclusion, as of now, we have no universally effective, well-proven symptomatic treatment for REM sleep behavior disorder. We have several medications that can help some people some of the time. We have clear evidence that environmental safety measures, removing sharp objects, padding corners, using low beds or mattresses on the floor, can dramatically reduce injury risk. We also have growing recognition among neurologists and sleep specialists that idiopathic REM sleep behavior disorder is a critical early warning sign for synucleinopathies and should prompt careful follow-up. There is, however, a far more hopeful development underway, and that is the biomarker revolution. In recent years, baseline results from a study called Syn-Sleep were announced. This longitudinal study used a test called Syn-One to detect phosphorylated alpha-synuclein in skin biopsies from people with idiopathic REM sleep behavior disorder. At baseline, the test detected abnormal alpha-synuclein in about 3/4 of those patients. This is remarkable. Using a simple skin biopsy, we can identify the pathological protein associated with Parkinson's disease, dementia with Lewy bodies, and multiple system atrophy in many individuals with REM sleep behavior disorder years before they develop overt motor or cognitive symptoms. Alongside skin biopsy biomarkers, other approaches are being investigated: cerebrospinal fluid assays, imaging such as dopamine transporter scans, autonomic function tests, olfactory testing, and detailed cognitive batteries. Large research consortia are building cohorts of people with REM sleep behavior disorder and related syndromes to track who converts to which disease and when. There are also early phase trials testing potential neuroprotective agents in people with idiopathic REM sleep behavior disorder. One example is a drug that may enhance mitochondrial function and has shown signals of benefit in Parkinson's disease epidemiology and preclinical models. The goal of these trials is ambitious: to slow or prevent progression from prodromal REM sleep behavior disorder to full-blown Parkinson's disease or dementia with Lewy bodies. All of this means that REM sleep behavior disorder is no longer just a frightening sleep disorder. It is becoming a critical gateway for early detection and, we hope, early intervention in some of the most devastating neurological diseases we face. Let me pull back and end where we began, with the paradox of a brain that is intensely active while the body is paralyzed. We often think of sleep as rest, as shut down. But in REM sleep, certain parts of your brain are more active than when you are awake. Visual areas blaze with imagery. Emotional centers light up. Memory and learning structures reorganize and integrate experiences. Your motor cortex rehearses movement patterns. It is like a nightly theater performance inside your skull, yet your body is frozen. That dissociation between a hyperactive brain and a paralyzed body is not a design flaw. It is a feature. It allows you to experience rich emotional dreams, to replay and reprocess memories, to train your brain in a virtual reality simulator without acting those experiences out in the real world. REM sleep behavior disorder breaks that elegant arrangement. The break line is cut. The same neurodegenerative process that first disrupts REM atonia can, over years, go on to erode dopamine-producing cells in the substantia nigra, impair cognitive networks in the cortex, and disturb autonomic regulation. REM sleep behavior disorder is the opening chapter of that story, and crucially, it is a chapter we can see and measure. So what should you do with all of this information? If you or someone you love is experiencing vivid, often violent dreams that are being acted out physically, mention it to a doctor. Ask for a referral to a sleep specialist. A proper sleep study can distinguish REM sleep behavior disorder from other conditions such as obstructive sleep apnea, nocturnal seizures, or non-REM parasomnias. If you are diagnosed with REM sleep behavior disorder, discuss with your clinician the full range of options, medications, behavioral strategies, bedroom safety measures, and have a realistic understanding that we are still learning what works best. If you have idiopathic REM sleep behavior disorder, ask about biomarker testing and clinical trials in your region. Above all, recognize that sleep is not a passive state. It is an active, dynamic, exquisitely orchestrated process that is deeply linked to the long-term health of your brain. When something as fundamental as REM muscle paralysis fails, it is a sign we must pay attention, not only to our nights, but to the decades ahead. Thanks so much for listening. I know topics like this can be scary, but it's also critical to get the word out there considering how many people suffer and are undiagnosed. Thank you for tuning in. And with that, I'll simply say good night, take care, and bye for now.